The United States is at war again, and many of us who call ourselves Christians in America are feeling the tug of two competing allegiances, one rooted in love of country, the other in love of Christ. And look, I get it. I have felt that tug before. 25 years ago, I began to grapple with the question, what does it mean to follow the Prince of Peace in a world at war? It was at times a very lonely journey. And so I'm recording this video in hopes of making the journey a little less lonely for some of you. A few weeks into my freshman year of college, 9/11 happened. I was actually watching the news that morning as the second plane came into view, crashed into one of the towers, and the towers collapsed. That event profoundly shaped my college experience. I attended a Christian college, one that was rooted in a historic peace church tradition, though that was not my tradition, far from it. Despite its heritage, the vast majority of the students and faculty at the college ended up becoming passionate supporters of the so-called war on terror that followed after 9/11. My sophomore year, a guest speaker came to chapel, and he began his message by saying something like, "When Jesus said, 'Love your enemies,' I think he probably meant don't kill them." Now that seemed pretty logical to me, but it offended a number of my classmates, for many began to stomp on the metal bleachers in the gym where we met. The sound was so loud the speaker had to stop giving his message. The students then stood up and walked out of chapel. My junior year, my on-campus job had me delivering pizzas to dorm rooms. And one day, I showed up with pizzas at a dorm room that was full of students who were crowded around a TV having a pizza party as they watched live coverage of what was dubbed the Shock and Awe campaign as America rained down bombs on Baghdad. The louder the explosions were, the louder my classmates cheered. Now, I had no commitment at that point to a Christian stance of nonviolence, yet as I left that dorm room that day, I was deeply troubled. How could those who say they follow Jesus delight and celebrate in the death of those who bear the image of God, who are created in God's own image? Over the remainder of my time at this college, I began to study the peace teaching of Jesus. I'm sure you know a lot of it. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Do not violently resist an evildoer. Love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. Pray for those who persecute you. Turn the other cheek. Go a second mile. Put your sword away, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Fast forward a few years, and then I was serving as a missionary in Canada's poorest neighborhood when one day my home church back in the States asked if I would come back and preach in November. I said yes, but only found out a couple days beforehand that I had been asked to preach on Veterans Day. I was the church's lone pacifist. This was a very patriotic denomination. The church was situated between two active military bases. Both of my parents had served in the military and were going to be there that day. That Sunday, November 11th, I spoke gently about Christ's call to love enemies and to work for peace in nonviolent ways. And many in that congregation were very respectful, but I lost a lot of financial support as a missionary and almost could not return to Canada. The reason I tell you that story is because I learned soon after that though churches nowadays, for decades now, they've paused on November 11th to honor those Christians who have bravely been willing to fight on behalf of their country. But historically, the church has paused for centuries on that very same day, November 11th, to honor the life of a Christian who refused to fight on behalf of his country. November 11th is the saint's day for Martin of Tours, who in the 4th century on the eve of battle proclaimed, "I am a Christian. It is not lawful for me to fight." When he was ridiculed as a coward, he said, "Then to have me stand unarmed in front of the ranks, for I would rather be slain than slay." When I learned this story, it sent me on a quest to study now not just the peace teachings of Jesus, but also the peace teachings of the early church, the church of the first 3 centuries before the church crawled into bed with empire. And what I discovered shocked me. For there is not a single Christian writing that has been found from the first 3 centuries of church history in which the writer approves of Christians using violence. Clement of Alexandria, for example, he said, above all, Christians are not allowed to correct by violence sinful wrongdoings. Or you have Justin Martyr, who said, "We who formerly went to war and mutually slaughtered each other, each one of us, all the world over." He's speaking about the church as a whole. And he says, "We've converted our instruments of war into tools that cultivate life, swords into plows, and spears into farming instruments." Tertullian, another example, he said, "Christ, in disarming Peter, disarmed every soldier." So I began on this journey of studying the early Christian teaching on war, violence, enemy love. And I actually, a few years back, created a free PDF book that I'll give a link to. You don't have to give your email or anything. You just click the link and it will take you there. And it contains 140 early Christian quotes on not killing. I began to have this practice that anytime America would start a new war, and the loud voices of Christian leaders in this country would often become the evangelists for that war, giving religious justification for our nation's war agenda, I would set those current voices aside, those loud voices, and I would find audio of America's bombing of Baghdad. I had a 6-minute audio that I had saved on my computer, and I'll pull it up and I'll listen to those bombs exploding on Baghdad. And now, instead of my classmates cheering, I read those quotes from the early church to remind myself of Christ's call to love enemies and wage peace. My hope in recording this video is that many of you will not feel so lonely on this journey. That instead of trying to have a divided allegiance between country and Christ, you will give your allegiance wholeheartedly to Jesus as King and work to be peacemakers in this warring world. Last thought. I find it fascinating that the only people whom Jesus ever called children of God were peacemakers and those who love their enemies. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. And love your enemies, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. It's almost as if Jesus is saying, when you love your enemies and overcome evil with good and war with peace, when you do that, you are in the spirit and image of of your Father in heaven, the spitting image of God above. For nothing shows the character of God more than when you wage peace and love enemies. I hope this is helpful, and I encourage you to download that PDF so that you can reflect on the teachings of the early church.